wealthy universities with departments of Islamic affairs, departments of Hebrew studies, departments of Middle East studies, and so on. And they all, you know, they have this vast sea of knowledge about the Middle East. But there's a total disconnect between the ordinary people, even the professors, and this whole sort of nexus of right-wing ideologues, think tanks, or think tanks as I call them, who settle around the White House and produce this policy. I can go and hear a perfectly good lecture on the history of Islam in Harvard, for example. But if I go to the State Department, the spokesman there speaks in a language which isn't even childish. The French have a very good word, infantilisme, which means babyishness. Most of the statements about the Middle East made by, for example, Mrs. Clinton, now she's Secretary of State, and indeed by Colin Powell before, and indeed by Bush, and in some cases even by Obama, are babyish in their quality. They have no conception of what the Middle East is like. Sometimes I think when I cross the Atlantic from Beirut, there's some kind of glass or curtain, some screen I go through in which I arrive in New York, and the Middle East that everyone talks about is not the place I live in. It's a very weird sensation. There's obviously something wrong there. It's a total disconnect between reality and what the White House says, and a disconnect between what the American people know and think and what their elected representatives say on the Hill, because once they get up into Congress or the Senate, they will never criticize Israel. And here, of course, we're going into the other very important category, which is the issue of Israel and the Palestinians.
Let's talk about bin Laden. Let's give the Americans a break. You've met the man 3 times.
They won't like that, but carry on, yeah.
You've met Osama bin Laden, Sheikh Osama bin Laden, as you also often refer to him. 3 times.
Yes, I refer to him as Sheikh Osama with a certain amount of cynicism, by the way. That's my dark sense of humor.
Right,
Carry on.
right. During one of the times that you met him, you say that he tried to convert you to Islam. And if I quote, to be precise, he said to you, Mr. Robert, one of our brothers had a dream. He dreamt that you were a spiritual person. This means you are a true Muslim.
No, actually what he said, and if you look at my book, The Great War for Civilization, it is the exact words, because I was taking them down at the time. He said that one of our brothers had a dream that you had come to us dressed in the clothes of an imam, riding a horse, of course, in the Muslim world being a symbol of chivalry and honor, and that therefore we believe you must be a true Muslim. And I believed at the time immediately this was an attempt to bring me across, if you see what I mean. And I was aware that I had a large number of very well-armed Al-Qaeda members sitting around me, hanging on bin Laden's every word as if he was the Mahdi. And on the one hand, I didn't want to have them turning their rather grim faces towards me. And on the other hand, I didn't want bin Laden not to realize the truth. So I said, Mr. bin Laden, I am not a Muslim. I am a journalist, but my job is to tell the truth. And he said, that is the same as being a Muslim, you see, telling the truth. And I let him get away with that. I can't, you know, read myself into his brain. And you've got to remember, this is well over 10 years ago this conversation took place, before 9/11. But obviously it did occur to me later, after 9/11, that if, for example, he'd found a Westerner who was persuaded spiritually or emotionally or nationalistically or whatever to go across to his side, how much easier it would be to have a Western white man with blue eyes flying a plane into a tall building. I can't say he was trying to recruit me, but that was my dark suspicion at the time. What for, I wouldn't know. But the moment he said that, I remember saying, oh, Robert, be careful how you answer that question. And I wanted to make it clear to him there was a very clear barrier between him and me. I was a journalist doing my best to get the truth out to the world. I was not joining him in any of his views.
What did you make of him? What did you make of Osama bin Laden at the time? Especially that, I mean, the man openly declared war during the time. I believe you met him 3 times over a period from 94 to 97, if I'm not mistaken.
93 to 97.
From 93 to 97.
Well, he changed a lot, and he's gone on changing, because, of course, I obviously watched the videotapes. And twice since. Actually, he wanted to see me after 9/11, and I tried to get to him, but the Taliban who were taking me in Afghanistan said that they thought we would be killed by American air power in the next village, which was being bombed. And I urged them to carry on, and they said no. They had children, they wanted to live, and I said, well, thank you very much, so do I, which showed that the Taliban didn't want to go on suicide missions at that stage, not for him anyway. And twice since then, he's mentioned me in his audio broadcasts. But the first time I saw him, he was extremely shy, never met a foreign reporter before. This was way out in the desert in Sudan, where he was using his construction crews to build a new road from a village to the main Port Sudan, Khartoum highway. Then when I saw him in Afghanistan, after he'd been chucked out of Sudan, he was clearly a very different man. He was very, very angry. His principal anger was against the Saudi regime, which he accused of corruption over and over and over again. The next time I saw him, the following year in Afghanistan, his anger had transmuted towards the West, towards the British, the French, but particularly the Americans, who at that stage still had more soldiers in Saudi Arabia than they have today. And he was obviously, he had obviously thought a good deal. He's not an intellectual, but he thinks. He's the only Arab figure I've ever met who speaks in complete sentences and never changes his mind. You know, he doesn't blurt something to your question out immediately. He waits. He would wait a minute cleaning his teeth with a piece of mishwak wood while he thinks about the answer. And he had obviously dwelt in his mind upon what he saw as his victory over the Russian military. It was a real victory, after all, it was true. And then the last words he said to me on that trip was, Mr. Robert, from this mountain upon which you are sitting, we were indeed at one of his bases in the mountains, originally built, of course, by the CIA during the Russian period.
Yes.
He said, from this mountain upon which you are sitting, we destroyed the Russian army and destroyed the Soviet Union. Well, that was a bit of a push, but there was an element of truth in it. And then he said, I pray to God that he permits us now to turn America into a shadow of itself. A phrase that I remembered, of course, when my plane had got back to Europe on 9/11 and I saw the pictures of Manhattan and the fog and smoke, and I thought, my goodness, Manhattan, New York is now a shadow of itself. But I remember that particular quotation because he clearly believed that because he'd beaten the Russians, therefore he would now fight the Americans and win again. After 9/11, I was invited to submit some questions to bin Laden. At this stage, you know, he was on the run. I know the questions.
I remember that time very well. And maybe, well, I will tell you maybe after the program, because your name...
No, on the program.
Your name came up when I was in Karachi meeting the masterminds, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Ramzi bin Al-Shib. But they were very keen on you. They think of you very highly as someone, irrespective of being Muslim or not, who truly seeks the truth and endeavors to be fair and balanced. That's how they.
Well, I don't seek their imprimatur for my work. I'm not very interested in what they think of me. I'm interested in getting it right, whether they like it or not. Certainly, some years after 9/11, I did submit a series of questions that went to bin Laden. One of which is, how can you claim you're winning when you've managed to draw the American military into occupying two more Muslim countries, Afghanistan and Iraq?
Yes.
And I got no reply, and I thought, my goodness, either he doesn't bother or he doesn't care. And within a few months, I was actually sitting in St. Louis, in America, about to give a lecture. And I had a version of an Al Jazeera broadcast after it had been manipulated by American television reporters, in which he appeared to refer to the occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan. And I immediately called Al Jazeera in Doha, and they then let me listen to the broadcast. And what he was doing was specifically answering all my questions, without any reference to me in the broadcast, one by one, in the order in which I'd written them down.
Wow.
And when he came to the issue of my question saying, well, what kind of victory when you've got American occupation of two more Muslim countries? He said, we have drawn the Crusader armies into the Muslim world so we can destroy them. And that was obviously the answer to my question.
Wow, wow. Bob, I'd like to talk to you about so many things. I'd like to talk to you about the Middle East peace process, which hopefully will be...
Who invented the word peace process? Was it Cyrus Vance all those years ago? I think he invented it in 1977, didn't he? What process has ever happened?
Right.
Okay, you go on with your question.
I know exactly what you think of that, but I would like to ask you some specific questions about the new efforts by President Obama and also Mr. Tony Blair, which I know also very well, and everybody knows very well how you think of him. And if indeed there is any hope in that, I would also like to talk to you about Lebanon, Hezbollah, Iran, and Egypt, the situation in Egypt. You've been in Egypt, in Cairo, very recently, and you've wrote a few pieces on the situation in Egypt, and which everyone in Egypt hopes it will turn out in the end in a good way. So a few minefields waiting for you after the break. استراحة قصيرة ونعود إليكم.
Yes.
أهلا بكم مرة أخرى إلى هذا اللقاء الخاص مع واحد من عمالقة الصحافة في العالم، هو روبرت فيسك، نجم جريدة الاندبندنت وقبلها التايمز في لندن، والمفكر الذي قضى حتى الآن في منطقة الشرق الأوسط وهو يعيش في بيروت أكثر من 34 عاما، وهو لا يزال يعشق الشرق الأوسط ويعشق الحمص والتبولة. Bob, is this still the case? You're still in love with our hummus and our tabbouleh. What makes you so in love?
I listen to that. Look, I am not in love with the Middle East. I hate journalists who say, oh, I love Egypt, I love Lebanon, you know, and then after 3 or 4 years they go and cover Moscow, and then they love Russia, and they go to Peking, and they love China, and so on. I certainly love the life I have had in the Middle East, which is not the same. But I've also been watching for more than 34 years now a massive human tragedy, and that has not been a great satisfaction to me. You know, I asked myself not long ago, sitting on my balcony in Beirut, you know, I travel to Europe sometimes. I'm only in London for a day, despite the House of Commons behind me. You know, and I come back to the Middle East and I see a society that is so broken, so oppressed, and so crushed. And I've asked myself, why don't I go and live in Europe? Why did I spend all this time here? Why, when I got a letter 34 years ago from my foreign editor saying, here's a great opportunity, go to the Middle East, Robert, lots of sunshine and a great adventure. That's what it said. And I look back now and I said, if I'd known then what I know now, would I have come to the Middle East? And the answer is
would
yes.
you have done it?
Yes, yes, and I'll tell you why, because it is an enormous, tragic piece of history, which is a ghastly privilege to witness, but which I have seen. I've seen history, which goes right back to the First World War, in which my father, who was much older than my mother, was a soldier in the Third Battle of the Somme. And I find now that, you know, watching events as I grow older is a bit like reading a great novel, like Tolstoy.